Settle down, class, and welcome to How to Design a Car for Non-Designers, okay? I'm your Professor Mitchell, and I'm going to be teaching you basically an amateur attempt at designing a car for people who don't have a design background, don't have any certain software programs, and are not really necessarily to spend money on the project, but would like to do it from a hobbyist perspective. All you're going to need really to do this, and that's if you want to go the extra mile, is a pencil, some graph paper, and a compass, maybe a marker pen, and that's it. You should be able to do it from start to finish for free, no special programs. The only two programs on the computer that we're going to talk about today are Microsoft Paint and a free browser-based program. So stick with me. I know this is an involved video, but you should be able to skip to parts that you find the most relevant, and I'd love to see what you guys create if you decide to do so. Hey guys, I'm just going to cut in really quick and include a table of contents. I talk a lot about vehicle specs and vehicles in general in this video, and if that information is not super relevant to you, you can jump to a place that you find more interesting or you find more relevant. So keep in mind between 55 seconds and about 1 minute and 15 seconds is where you can find this, or it should be in the description. All right, happy designing. As proof that this is going to be a frugal endeavor, I'm currently using a car antenna as my indicator stick. So you know that this is a cost-effective lecture. So stick with me, let's go. Alrighty, so in order to get even to the point where we can design a car, we have to get a few specifications figured out to lay the groundwork for the type of vehicle you want to make. So let's just start from the very beginning. What kind of vehicle do we want to make? What class of vehicle, what body style? Are we thinking about a pickup truck? Are we thinking about a small little sedan? Are we thinking about a race car that goes zoom, zoom, fast, fast? You know what, you tell me, this is your creation. So let's start with inspiration. So I designed, for the purpose of this video, 2 different vehicles, but the one I'm gonna walk through with you is a pickup truck. My inspiration for the pickup truck is I wanted a really, really small micro car pickup truck. Yes, it's an abomination. I think it's hilarious, but the creation of this vehicle will allow me to show basically what we can do through this pretty easy amateur program so you can make your own. So yes, what I'm thinking of is I'm thinking of a super small pickup truck. So think what you want. If it's that race car, if it's that family mobile, if it's a gigantic tank on wheels, you know what, you tell me. If you don't necessarily have an inspiration, do some Googling, think of your favorite cars, why are they your favorite cars, and kind of try to emulate something that's a little bit more than or a little bit different or catered more to you, okay? So now that we kind of have that in mind, let's move on to the actual specifications of the vehicle. The chassis or the frame, okay? So the chassis or the frame of the vehicle is what holds all the weight, what has the engine sitting on top of it, what has the entire body, and everything like that. So the type of chassis really sets the groundwork for the type of vehicle that we're gonna make. So we're gonna operate with 2 main types of chassis for the purpose of this. I know there are more, but we're gonna do the 2 simplest kinds, and that's gonna be unibody and body on frame. So unibody is basically where the chassis and the body of the vehicle are the same. This is typically for sedans or crossover SUVs, and it allows you to have a lighter weight. It allows you to have a better on-road feel. It's easier and a little bit less expensive to manufacture, and it's lighter weight, like I said earlier. That's the sort of thing where you'd lean towards a unibody design. Now, a body on frame is the traditional way to make a vehicle. That's how we started off making vehicles back in the early 1900s, is basically where you take the frame and you stick the body on top of it. It allows it to be much more rugged, it's heavier, it can take more abuse. So this is more designed for things like trucks, things for like off-road style SUVs, and it usually happens to be taller as well. So depending on what you're thinking of and the inspiration we started off with, what chassis you want to go towards, you tell me. Now usually next, before we would get to the engine, I would touch on suspension. Now suspensions are infinitely more complex than the things that I'm going to go over today, so we can sort of brush past that for right now, but keep that in mind if you want to do independent research or you would like me to do something specifically on suspensions, which I probably will do eventually. You tell me and I can do that for you, or do your own independent research. But we're going to skip suspension for the purpose of this video. All right, so next, engine type. Now this is pretty complex, but I think it's extremely important. So there are things that we have to keep in mind: the cylinders, the layout, and the add-ons. So You know, people will talk about the V6 engine or the inline 4 or things like that. These all are referring to a specific type of engine. When most people think of a standard engine, they're probably thinking of a V6. The V stands for actually the formation that the cylinders in the engine are standing. They're sort of at a V formation and they're symmetrical to one another and they fire back and forth like this. Then there is an inline engine where all the cylinders are in a line. And the last one that we're going to talk about today, even though there are a lot of variations to these are the basic models, is the boxer or flat engine, where it is still symmetrical, but instead of in a V or straight across, but lays flat, where the pistons fire outward. And this can have a lot of different formations as well. Now, the advantages and disadvantages of all of these. A V engine is lighter weight and easier to fit into vehicles with more vertical space. The inline engine is a little bit smoother ride, but it's a little bit harder to fit because it's long. You know, there's no such thing as a inline 12 unless you're talking about like a speedboat or something like that. Something that can handle an engine that's extremely long. Inline engines are easier to balance, they're cheaper to make, but they can take up more room, they can be a little heavy, and not too many people use inline engines outside of sedans that have like an inline 4 or something like that. The boxer engine is difficult to maintain and is heavier, but is easy to balance and has a very low center of gravity. Keep those engine types in mind, then we need to go towards cylinders. Now, I mentioned this a couple times already, but cylinders is correlated to how much power an engine can produce. So something like what people like to call two bangers or a 2-cylinder engine is very unlikely to pump out tons and tons and tons of horsepower and torque. It's a small engine, it's very lightweight. I don't think very many, if at all, are in use anymore. But something like a V6 engine typically has more power, but it does have to do with pressure ratio and the size of the cylinders as well. But we're not going to get into all that technical nonsense. But just keep in mind that more cylinders typically means more power, but also more space and more weight. So just keep that in mind. And the last thing we're going to talk about is add-ons. So the two add-ons I'm going to specifically talk about are turbochargers and superchargers. Turbochargers are a mechanically powered air intake device that basically sucks in air and pumps it into the cylinder of the engine. That allows the engine to have more pressure in the cylinder and therefore create more power. A supercharger does the exact same thing, but instead of the mechanical force of the air causing the turbocharger to work, the supercharger has a motor of its own. So the advantages and disadvantages to these things. A turbo takes a while to build up. It needs to suck in enough air for that mechanical apparatus to start working and begin pumping air into the engine. So there is a thing called turbo lag. You want to go 0 to 60 super fast, it might be a little bit before your turbo kicks in. Now a supercharger tends to steal power from the engine because it has a motor of its own and requires electricity and power to function itself. But there is no lag, and it tends to be a little bit more expensive, and it's less common for a standard vehicle to have a supercharger in it. So, of course, these add expense to the vehicle, these add weight, and these are a little bit harder to fit in vehicles because they take up more space. I hope I haven't lost anyone so far, but I'm trying to keep it simple. So keeping that in mind, just to use myself for an example, my little micro truck, I kind of wanted it to be an off-roady type vehicle and to handle a bunch of abuse, but to be particularly small. So in covering this so far, I want a body on frame construction so it can sit higher and be a little bit heavier. Since the vehicle is going to be so small, I need as much weight as I can get to make sure my vehicle doesn't tip over or get completely obliterated in an accident. So with that in mind, I'm okay with a little bit more weight. In fact, I want a little bit more weight and I want a low center of gravity. So what I had in mind was a turbocharged 4-cylinder boxer engine. Now 4 cylinders is not that much in the horsepower direction, but if it's turbocharged and it's a boxer engine, it can get some good torque in this little thing and really keep pumping, but it doesn't have a lot of space that the engine needs longitudinally because it sits outward. So I'm able to fit it in a relatively small area. On top of that, and I know this is a side note, I wanted this to be a diesel engine, which increases the amount of torque that an engine can put out. But when it comes to fuel, it's typical that if you're making a sports type vehicle, you want to go premium or alternative fuels. If you want to just make a normal sedan, SUV, that sort of thing, just operate on unleaded. But if you want a torque mobile, and not very many diesels are made anymore, especially diesel turbocharged boxer engines, but I had diesel in mind for this vehicle. But anyway, keep what you want in mind and you tell me let's go from there. Orientation. This is not orientation for the class, but orientation for your vehicle. I'm sure you've heard somebody say four-wheel drive, front-wheel drive, rear-wheel drive, and what the pros and cons of these orientations are. That is closely related to vehicle layout, but we'll touch on that included in this topic. So orientation, let's start with rear-wheel drive. Rear-wheel drive is, of course, when the vehicle's driving force is in the rear wheels. That, when you put on the accelerator, the rear wheels are the ones that are powering the vehicle, and the front wheels obviously hold balance and stuff like that, but they don't have the direct engine power turning those tires. Front wheel drive obviously is the front wheels doing that. Four-wheel drive is all four wheels through the use of differentials and things like that. All four wheels are getting direct engine power, and all-wheel drive is similar to four-wheel drive, but there's a system that allows each tire to detect how much traction it needs. A lot of race cars nowadays are also all-wheel drive to accommodate how much traction each tire needs in order to maximize grip and force forward to propel that high-performance vehicle forward. So if you're doing a family mobile, a minivan, or a sports car, all-wheel drive might be your choice. If you want a pure off-roader, four-wheel drive might want to be your choice. So let's go to rear and front-wheel drive. Rear-wheel drive really has abilities when it comes to handling, acceleration, and it does help with towing capacity as well. Front-wheel drive tends to have better gas mileage, it has more room in the vehicle, and they're cheaper to manufacture, but have worse acceleration, worse towing capacity, handle a little bit worse than rear-wheel drive vehicles. Now keep in mind that most vehicles nowadays are front-wheel drive. Rear-wheel drive typically are more for performance vehicles, and like I said about all-wheel drive, it's much more for your minivans, your crossover SUVs, your sports cars, your high-performance sports cars. And four-wheel drive are for your off-road, power-hungry, torque-loving trucks and stuff like that. So that's the orientation. That's how your vehicle is going to move. Okay, so let's find out about the layout now. So if you are a front-wheel drive car, where does your engine go? So there are some common orientations for this. For instance, front wheel drive is an extremely common car engine layout. That means that the engine sits right on top of the tires that it's propelling to move, and it really is pretty complex, it's pretty simple, everything's kind of right up front, and it's easy to work on. Then of course there are front engine rear wheel drive cars where the engine is on the front of the car and it is powering the rear wheels. This is good on weight distribution because you have the mechanics spread out throughout the vehicle. It might be a little bit heavier because you have to have all those mechanics spread out throughout the vehicle as well. Weight increasing means usually worse gas mileage and maybe a little bit worse performance because more weight equals horsepower, meaning less, unfortunately. There are a lot of variations to these, so I'm just going to read out the rest of them pretty commonly. Front engine four-wheel drive. Rear engine rear-wheel drive is extremely uncommon. I think the Porsche 911 might be the only one right now. Mid-engine rear-wheel drive, that's much more for high performance vehicles because typically your engine is where your back seat would be, and that's for like coupe type models. For me, I wanted the engine right up front and I wanted it to be a four-wheel drive vehicle as it will be intended to handle a lot more than the size of the vehicle would be usually capable of. So a front engine four-wheel drive, flat four engine with a turbo diesel on a body-on-frame chassis. So that's where I'm at so far. So keep tracking with me and think about these specifications in which they apply to your inspiration. To relate to these things, but just a little bit more simple, think about the design of the vehicle. Is this meant to be a coupe? A coupe meaning traditionally that it only has two doors. Is it supposed to be a 2x2 where it has two front seats, two back seats, usually 4 doors? Is this something like a minivan where you want a sliding door on the side and 7 seats and you can basically put the whole soccer team in there? You determine basically what you want the function and the look of that vehicle to be. So we've covered on design. So now dimensions. This is something I can't necessarily tell you, but this is something that I would tell you to sort of lean and do some research. Let's think about this. The length of the vehicle, the height of the vehicle, and the width of the vehicle. Let's say you want to have something based off of the 2020 Corolla. The 2020 Corolla is not a long vehicle, it's not a high vehicle, and it's not a wide vehicle. If those are characteristics that you want with your vehicle, I would compare it to something like the Corolla. If you want something, sports related, race car related, those sorts of things, then take your inspiration from things like Ferrari or the Supra or things like that. Within height, width, and length, however, there are 2 other things that you have to keep in mind, and that is wheelbase and track. Wheelbase is the distance between the front and back axles. So you're looking at a vehicle from the side. What's the difference between the center of the front tire and the center of the back tire? That's your wheelbase. A longer wheelbase allows simply for more space in the vehicle, typically heavier. And if you're leaning towards something like a minivan, obviously you want it longer, but if you're leaning towards something much more like a Jeep Wrangler, an uphill mobile, then you want that wheelbase to be shorter, because if you're going over a jagged surface, you don't want to get stuck. So track is the distance between the front tires and the back tires. So front track is simply the distance between front left and front right. Rear track, rear left, rear right. So for instance, the 2020 Corolla has 60.3 inches in between the front tires, but has 60.4 inches in between the back tires. Why? Well, I think simply more just because of the construction of the vehicle to make sure everything fit inside of it. Most vehicles have that number the exact same. Although some vehicles have it a little bit wider in the front, some vehicles have it a little bit wider in the back. I think it has a lot more to do with fitting everything inside the vehicle that you want to fit. But typically I would lean towards maybe having the rear slightly wider than the front, or having them almost the exact same. So these are the specs you want to cover before making your vehicle. Now, I have done so. I will jump over to my desk now, and I'll be going over graph paper in which I'll draw out the design of my vehicle. Now, you don't have to be an artist to do this. You don't have to be good at drawing to do this. Make hearty use of your eraser and look up a lot of vehicles that you're inspired from to compare design lines from, profile, shape, aerodynamics, and things like that. So let's jump over to my desk now, and I will be drawing out my design and talking about my inspiration, where it came from. All right, welcome. That's me waving. I'm here at the desk, giving you a thumbs up that you mostly can't see. But here, I'm going to show you basically what I'm looking at here. That's a list of vehicles I was inspired by in order to create my micro truck, including like the Scion IQ and smart cars and things like that, but also was inspired by things like the Tacoma. These are the features that I came up with. They're all estimations. And the reason why is I basically averaged all the cars I was inspired by to get those specs. There's my body on frame, my 2-liter flat 4 turbo diesel, front engine, 4-wheel drive, 2-door, 2-seat. Pickup truck, that's what I'm talking about. Woohoo! And of course, the Mitchell Motors Goblin is about to be started. So here, I'm gonna fast forward through a lot of these things. Pretty much what I did on the graph paper is I counted the number of squares it is across and divided it by the length of vehicle that I was intending to make, just so it will give me the ability to make it as big as possible, but also to scale. So I came to a thing of one box is 4 inches, across the top and across the side. So, 4 square inches basically. So this is making the box of the dimensions of my vehicle. That includes a midpoint just to help me out, and that's also going to include the wheelbase. Right now I'm putting a center point and circling my tires so you can see the size. Of course, we have to make the wheel well around those. And if you see on my lap, I'm actually looking at other vehicles for inspiration, and I highly, highly suggest that you do that. The reason why is, if you just start from base and don't really have a working point and you've never done this before, it can be really confusing, especially from a design aspect. This is me putting ground clearance, and as I'm going, I'm actually adjusting a lot of my calculations for length, width, height, and things of this vehicle. So if you look at my paper over there, I'm actually covered in calculations. I'm continuing to operate around the wheel well, operate around the size of the vehicle, and comparing it to other vehicles for inspiration. This is me putting in the bed of the pickup truck. And I'm actually going to be constructing the wheel well, and I want it, instead of being almost like a larger circle, like a lot of crossovers or cars, I kind of want it to be that off-road style, sort of arced situation, so I can accommodate maybe a bigger tire if those off-road junkies wanted to put a larger tire and a larger lift kit on it. It's a little bit more accommodating that way. These sort of design features are important, so that's why I want to talk about looking at other vehicles for inspiration, especially if you've never done this before. And I'm not a fantastic artist. I'm really just one of those people that uses my eraser a lot, so with the graph paper, it does allow you to make things symmetrical pretty easily, and you can just use that for comparison. We are doing the profile view first, and I will be jumping over to the front and back afterward. But, a lot of this just kind of is trial and error on what I like, what design looks good, what design looks bad. But you do want to keep in mind, keeping a conventional looking vehicle is more likely to accommodate the hundreds and hundreds of safety requirements that the United States has for vehicles. So if you did want to make a gigantic cube on a frame, it might be a fun creation, but it's unlikely to be road legal. Just keep that in mind. This is me slowing down a little bit to remind you guys, don't forget your rear view mirrors. They are important. They do not actually count in the width of vehicle calculation. So if you were to walk out to your vehicle to measure how wide it is, if you didn't want to Google it, keep in mind that it does not include the rear view mirrors in that calculation. I did this on a previous vehicle that I designed. Don't forget to put a door on your vehicle. You have to make the seams that the door would open and close in as well. There's a headlight. I'm going to include it to make it look a little bit more, not as roundy. And we're starting to see the shape of the vehicle I'm creating. Don't forget your handle so you can get in your truck, that sort of thing. And just keep looking for different details that you might have missed. Like for instance, I'm adding actually the wheel on my tire. And although I won't actually add spokes, like the spokes of the wheel to this vehicle, I want to keep that in mind, and I'm putting the gas cap on the truck as well. Just adding more and more features because you want it to make it look as close to a real vehicle as possible, if of course that's what you're going for. I'm not going to tell you what you can and can't do. So there is our profile view, and now we're going to jump over to the front and back. Here I am. So I'm going to start by making my box again. This is of course height and width. So we're going to fast forward again, blah, blah, blah. Here we go. This is me putting both the front and the back on the same piece of paper. The previous vehicle I designed, I was able to put it all on one piece of paper, the profile front and back. But that's not always going to work depending on what your scale is. So 17 boxes across, 16 boxes high. I'm trying to line up features for my profile because obviously this is not three separate vehicles. This is the same vehicle, and features that are shown on the profile view need to wrap around to the front. There's me reminding everybody to exclude mirrors in your width calculation. So if your mirrors do pop outside of your box that you make, that's a-okay. So there's me making my tailgate. And also keep in mind that you want profile lines. This is not a big box. It's curvy, and curvature actually creates strength in crash testing and stuff like that. So, you want things rounded. You want very, very few things to be right angles and really boxy. Don't forget your trailer hitch. I'm adding some design features. I think I'm inspired by one of the vehicles on my iPad at my lap right there. This is going to probably work to be my tail lights. And keep in mind that you want something to have a basis based on, currently in circulation vehicles, unless you're going for some sort of supercar and you're not really attempting for it to be road legal. Alrighty, and keeping in mind that, the top of the truck like that, the angle I choose is going to have to be mirrored on the front view, because it's all going to be the same dimensions. Adding more features. And if you don't really know what design features to add, if something looks way too plain or just kind of looks silly, look up just a bunch of different vehicles. If you're making, for instance, a mid-sized sedan, just Google mid-sized sedans and then look up, mid-sized sedan from the rear, mid-sized sedan from the front. Oh yeah, here I am making my Mitchell's Motors logo. It doesn't look that cool, but it is what it is. If you look here, I'm going to actually try a bunch of different design features that I'm not going to like, and then I'm going to look for further inspiration for the back there around the logo. Trying to line up. See, on the profile view, my tail light is small, and on the back, my tail light is really wide. So I actually did a wraparound thing that accommodated that. There we go. There's me adding another line to add a dimension to it, so it's not just this flat-looking truck back. There's a design. See, that's the one I ended up liking the most. It's a little bit sleeker. And a lot of times, simplicity with a design is the best way to go. Keep in mind that your ground clearance is going to want to be the same, although some fronts of vehicles is going to be higher than the back of other vehicles, or maybe the center of the vehicle is the lowest point off the ground. So try to keep in mind when you're making your dimensions how to do that. Here I am trying to line up the curves of the vehicle to the back and the profile, a lot of those details. And you're going to be able to keep an eye on that, and just keep in mind that all of these things wrap around, And although I don't do it for the purpose of this video, the next step after doing the back and the front would actually be to do the diagonal, where you get to see the corners and how they wrap around from the front to the side. I will admit that the front design was the hardest for me in this, and I'm actually going to show you how to edit what you've already drawn and inked later in the video once you scan it to the computer. And we'll get to that a little bit later. But if you don't like the physical drawing that you've made up, I will show you how to do some easy edits in Microsoft Paint or a browser-based application that we will use later. The more inspiration, the better, I say, but of course, the idea is that you're making an improvement. You don't want to just make a carbon copy of an existing vehicle. Unless you do, I'm not here to tell you how to live your life. So you do you. Obviously, your vehicle needs a grille, unless you're something like a Tesla. If you're leaning towards an electric vehicle, which we didn't really talk about in the specs, no harm, no foul, but you don't necessarily need a grille for that. More design, more design. You want to put a place for your license plate, make it look a little bit fancy. A lot of vehicles actually do that nowadays. Don't forget your rear view mirrors. There are some curvature to the front of your vehicle. Even though I'm kind of making a more boxy type vehicle, you've got to have some curvature to it because it does make more strength, and I do believe there are safety laws that you can't make a big box. Adding my rear views, it doesn't matter that they stick outside. Adding the actual bulbs of the headlamps. We're getting close to finishing here. Although I don't love this design, I will improve it later. Add some tire stuff, more details, and here we go. There is the front and back completed, and we will go to inking next, I believe. So here we are. The reason you ink is that it's going to be much easier to scan and get rid of any goofy mistakes that you might have made. I fast forwarded through this very quickly because, you just need to go over what you've already done. Sometimes it can be hard. I didn't use a ruler for some of the straight lines, but I highly suggest that you do. When we scan it in, this will allow us to easily eliminate those extra lines, maybe eraser scrubs, eraser smudges, and things like that. And, if you don't like something, you're able to see it clearer because it's such a more detailed line. I also do highlight that using a marker pen is better than just a standard pen, although I have used both. Whatever you have in mind, don't necessarily buy something special for this if this is your first time. All right, now I'm just going to go through and erase all of my pencil lines. Okay, so now where I'm at is I have scanned my drawings onto the computer. You will see some of the graph paper that pops up, especially on my rear and front designs, but this scans in as a PDF. If you don't have a scanner, keep in mind that you can use Genius Scan, a free scanning PDF application. There's a free application of it. So now I'm looking at my design, and it's not exactly what I wanted. I want it to be smaller. When I was, there's me showing that it's a PDF. When I was over at my girlfriend's house, actually, I measured the truck bed lengths and the length of the cab for the driver and passenger, and I just determined that mine was really long and it didn't need to be nearly that long. So I put the point at which I'd like to shrink the truck. This is me just using the select tool and then delete to get rid of a bunch of features. I selected my door handle to get it out of the way, and then I can actually move the truck in closer and move some things around. This is me just putting a line there by copying and pasting it, Control C, Control V. And you see that things don't perfectly line up, but they're pretty darn close. So you can use the eraser function, use the color select tool, and then use it to combine all of those things. And it basically looks like I drew it that way. So now that I shrunk the size of the cab of the truck, I'm actually going to shrink the front of it to make it as small as possible, as that was the goal of my vehicle. And this will actually look to be much easier than you'd think. That design feature by the top left of the wheel well just basically is going to go away and combine, and I'll show you that. It'll pop up right here. I'll combine those two things and get rid of that one design line here in just a second. Use the eraser. And I know this is Microsoft Paint, so any real designer is going to be losing their mind that I'm suggesting using this, but I'm not going to advise you go out and buy hundreds of dollars of software. You can just use something to make it fun, to make it easy for you, and if you really, really like doing it, you can go from there. So here, basically, I just had to fix two lines, and it looks like I drew it that way from the beginning. Yeah, I wanted a darker color, so you can select and just use the, I missed. Select and use the, paint bucket feature to darken the lines to make it match just a little bit better, because of course there is color variance even if it is a black marker pen. There we go. So there I have shrunk the design, and basically what that ended up doing is shrinking the length of my truck, which was already very short, another 20 inches. So this overall size would be around 120, 136 inches long, which is basically 4 inches over 11 feet long, which is a very, very short truck. Here I am doing shrinking things even more, and getting rid of these design features, ends up being kind of easy because it's such bare bones black and white. All right, so jumping to the front and back, I'm getting rid of as much clutter as I possibly can. You don't have to get rid of all of it. Don't drive yourself crazy. But yeah, getting rid of the graph paper. The reason you use graph paper is since it's blue, a lot of scanners won't even pick it up. Alrighty, so as I was talking about earlier, I'm improving the front design of my vehicle, especially taking more inspiration from existing vehicles. I'll show you later that, I compare it to a Chevy truck, I believe, to get a better look at where the logo should go and where the grille should go. So the grille commonly on trucks actually goes between the two headlights. And if you want to slow down, you can actually see a lot of the things I'm clicking on. It's a lot of the select tool. You could use resize to flip things 180 degrees and stuff like that. So I'm like, wow, this doesn't quite look right, even though I'm combining the grille and the headlamps. It just doesn't look quite the way I want to. And, I later determined that the logo is located in kind of a goofy spot. So I'll fix that later. But, stretching this, it's very malleable. Using paint is very easy. There I am. I'm using the example of the Chevy truck to actually put the logo in the middle of my grille rather than underneath it. And using that, that scoop design to add that extra feature to complete the look. And that's just me using the shape tool to put in that sort of rectangle shape. I'm also thinking that you don't want a window directly behind the head of the driver, as if you get in an accident, you can just have your head fly out the back window. Okay, I'm copying and pasting it and putting it, on the same page. So yeah, I got rid of those back windows except for the center one to see out the back, rear view mirror. There I am. Alrighty, so we're bringing it over to a Pixlr X. Pixlr X is a free browser platform. I've used it for a lot of the videos here at the dealership, a lot of the images rather. And if you pull it into there, you can actually use the snip tool, magic cutout, and then press remove, and remove all the white space you can. I fast forwarded through this very quickly because it's a little bit tedious, but once you get rid of that, it's going to get rid of all the clutter that might exist. So once you save it, you can open it back up in Paint, and then if you use the paint dump tool, you can give yourself a color very easily. Now, of course, if your lines aren't completely enclosed, it will spill over to other sections, so you just have to make sure you completely close them. But since I called this the Goblin, I wanted it to be kind of a lime greenish color, and I'll show you how to make the color a little bit more lifelike, despite it being in Paint a little bit later. So, doing the headlights, I'll come back and fix the color on those later. And brown and green being a Goblin color, it made sense to me. So then we get to the point where, you don't want everything to be so flat colored. You want everything to have a little bit more texture. So just here in a second, you're going to see that my variance in shades of brown will show us that it brings more texture, that the shadow, the implied shadow that would exist in the reality implies, that there's more of a realistic nature to it by using different shades of color. I will later do that with the green. I'm about to do it right now, I believe, to give it, things that are indents or things that would have much heavier shadow would, be a darker green, at least to appearance, even though it would all be painted the same color, quote unquote, in real life. So that design line is supposed to signify a crease in the vehicle to give it that rounded shape. So you don't want to make it super dark, but you want to make underneath the crease slightly darker to add an additional texture to the vehicle, an additional textured look. So I just make it slightly darker underneath that crease line to give it that rounded look, and you'll see that it adds another dimension to the vehicle. Here we are. I'm doing it a lot faster. I sped it up after this to add more texture. I'm doing my logo, whatever. I just say make the glass blue, adding Goblin for life on my license plate. Of course, it's in Texas, the greatest country in the world, as some would say. And there I am. There it's all finished, and there's the computerized version. Thank you. Thank you guys so much for sitting through my Car Design for Non-Designers 101 class. I'd love to see what other people come up with if they use this model that I taught today. I know it's a lot of work, but it allows people without any special programs, any special trainings, to create the car of their dreams. So thank you so much. My name is Mitchell. I'm here at Fred Haas Toyota Country. See you in the next video.